In this video, I am talking about why it is the best time to be a Star Wars fan. I'm going to talk about Lucasfilm being bought by Disney and the future of Star Wars beyond this current saga. What is up, YouTube? It's Josh. This is the Den of Nerds. Guys, it is May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. I hope you are out getting a bunch of cool Star Wars swag, probably spending way too much money, as I know I am, on Star Wars merchandise. This is a big day for Star Wars fans. It's just another day that we get to celebrate this universe and this story and brand that we all love. And I was sitting around thinking about what kind of video I wanted to do with regards to Star Wars, and I actually have a Snoke theory that I am working on and also a Thrawn-Snoke connection video. But I thought today I would just talk about why I think is the best time ever to be a Star Wars fan, and I want to kind of explain why. Now, when Disney bought Lucasfilm, there was a lot of mixed feelings among the Star Wars fandom. There were people that thought this was a brilliant thing. There were people that were really concerned. I think at the end of the day, the simple fact that they were going to continue making Star Wars movies was a huge selling point. A lot of fans were really into that, especially with the prequels not being that well received. As it stood, we had three considered to be really great Star Wars films and three not so great Star Wars films. I'm really generalizing here, but that was about where we stood in the community. There was a pretty good balance there. We really needed episode 7 to be good because it was that tipping point, right? It was going to be the thing that pushed us to 4 good movies, 3 bad, or 4 bad movies, 3 good. It was pretty well received, sits at like a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. People have their issues with it, and I totally get it. But at the end of the day, under the new Lucasfilm Disney partnership, we have experienced, in my opinion, 2 incredible movies that have furthered the canon and really tied everything together. And I want to stop right there because I'm saying this word canon again, and I want to sort of explain why this is such a big deal and why all of these Star Wars nerds say the word canon and where this comes from and why it's a really cool thing. So when we just had 1 Star Wars movie, all the way back in 77, before we even got Empire, there started to be other kinds of stories that were out there. There were little games here and there, trading card games, obviously. Splinter of the Mind's Eye was this very popular book that came out before Empire that sort of explored this universe. There were comic books, there were a lot of different things, and there wasn't really a need for canon at that time because there was just the movie and there were the things that were exploring parts of the universe, ancillary material. Now, none of this stuff really explored much of the Star Wars total universe. This all changed when an RPG came out, and this was a literal paper and pencil role-playing game. And because of the nature of role-playing games, the people that designed this game had to go deep, and it was the first time that we had this lore completely filled out for this universe of Star Wars. Now, what's really interesting is the Lucasfilm Story Group nowadays has a lot of people that sit on it that played that role-playing game. That role-playing game basically gave them what they were looking for when, nerds want to go deep. That's what this channel is about. That's what nerddom is about. You go deep on the things you love. You want to know every little thing about every aspect of the Star Wars universe. That's what that role-playing game was, and that was kind of the birth of the idea of canon. But once Empire was being developed, this is when official canon happened because Lucas had to eliminate certain things like Splinter of the Mind's Eye and, comic books in order to give a clean through line to the story. So once this happened, there was canon, what happened in the movies, and then there was expanded universe, all of the other stuff. Now, although some of this stuff went through George Lucas directly and he had a lot of control on it, it didn't necessarily affect the world that the characters that showed up in the movies lived in. So that is the big difference. Now, when Lucasfilm was bought by Disney, one of the things they said was all content now coming out under this Disney partnership was going to be canon. What that meant was if you were reading a book and something happened to Luke Skywalker in that book that was interesting, when you saw Luke Skywalker on the screen of the movie, that was the same Luke Skywalker that had that interesting thing happen to him. And because the story group is this unit in which all stories for games, books, comics, and movies go through, they have a shared continuity that makes sense. Now, there's good and bad to this, but what this really did was make people who maybe weren't that interested in the idea of expanded universe really excited in all of the ancillary content. I'll be honest, I read some of the expanded universe, but I wasn't a huge expanded universe nerd. And part of that had to do with the fact that it did not directly tie into the stories and the characters that brought me into Star Wars first, which was the movies. So the formulation of the story group and the formulation of the new canon, or as they like to call it, just plain old canon, is a super big deal and something that is really important to why it is so awesome to be a Star Wars fan right now. Like, I can go pick up comic books, read certain things that happen, and then get inside the head of the characters I know from the movies and consider what it was like with the new information I have about their back history. Like, for instance, like the Han-Leia thing. Han and Leia's relationship, it gets a new context after you read the Han Solo book, after you read the Star Wars book, and you understand that they went their separate ways after that. They weren't just together that whole time. Because remember, there's about 3 years in between every one of these films. So that is just something that for me as a fan is really, really cool. Not to mention the fact that I think they're treating this stuff with respect. Disney and Lucasfilm didn't just go out and get a bunch of corporate bigwigs to take over and start making decisions. They took people that were already established at Lucasfilm, people that were deeply invested in Star Wars. Dave Filoni is a great example. Dave Filoni learned Star Wars what he considers. He literally said this at Celebration. It was dope. He said, I learned Star Wars the right way from George. And that's why, like on the Rebels panel, when he's saying, it really makes me happy that you guys are saying what you're saying, because it means that I have taught you Star Wars the right way. Guy that worked right under George. And there are a lot of people like that in the story group. They love it the way we love it. So they are in charge, and it is great when businesses do this. When you buy a company because it is succeeding at something, it is doing something right. So don't go in there and mess with it. Let those people do what they do and enable them to do more. And I think that is what is brilliant about the partnership with Disney and Lucasfilm. Guys, Celebration was fantastic this year. Celebration was one of the best experiences of my life as a Star Wars fan, and I owe it to Disney for doing this, because I just don't think it would be the same if George had been left in charge, if this was still his show. And I love George Lucas, but you know, he's kind of like that bitter, kind of grumpy old man who wants it to be his way, and he can't take no for an answer, and different things like that. We have to call a spade a spade. And the truth is, honestly, where we are at now with this universe is a beautiful place that I truly do not believe we would be able to be at without Disney. So that is pretty much why I think the Lucasfilm Story Group is an amazing asset to us as fans, and why it is the best time to be a fan of Star Wars, because all of these theory videos that blow up on the internet, and all the talk we have with each other, and all the things that I enjoy to do, the Rebel Scum podcast guys do, Jedi Council, and everything, none of this would be possible without the canon. Because we go into Aftermath and we find little hints and details and little pieces of information, and we try to inform our vision for what Snoke is, or our vision for where Kylo has been, or the turn, or the fall of Luke's academy. So we get to speculate and investigate these things and experience them in this wider, expansive universe, this living, breathing thing that is Star Wars. And it's really, really cool. So the question becomes, where do we go from here? And I was thinking a lot about this because there are rumors out there suggesting that Disney will take a break from the Saga films of up to 6 years. And that's really interesting to me. And I don't really think that would be a mistake, because I think they're teetering, especially after they make these next couple movies, on an oversaturation of Star Wars cinema. Now, I don't think the books are going to stop anytime soon. The comics are not going to stop. And I think we're going to get more on television, more animated series, but also possibly live action. Not to mention the fact that the video games have actually done not a great job at all of filling out the canon. And that was a big thing for people when it came to consolidating the canon. They said even the video games, everything that happens in the video games as far as a campaign or a story will fit within the larger Star Wars universe, which is cool because honestly, video games, when done correctly, can be a very immersive and visceral way to tell a very interesting story. And it's almost like you have been there. So like, for instance, in KOTOR, you actually feel this strong connection to Revan because you were there as Revan. You know what I mean? You were there interacting with these characters. So like, that shit is dope. Like that's good stuff. So for me, I think the future, we're going to see a focus on video games. We're going to see a focus on television. We might take a step back with Saga films, which is going to be okay. And the Skywalkers might fall to kind of into obscurity. You know, if Kylo's the last Skywalker, you know, in order for that line to continue, he would have to have children. So there'd have to be something interesting going on with there. It's actually probably the biggest piece of evidence for Rey being a Skywalker is that that line needs to continue. Perhaps she is a forced birth, making her a Skywalker, or she's Han and Leia's secret daughter, highly unlikely, or she's Luke's daughter, probably Luke's daughter. So as we move forward, if they pull back on the Saga films, I think we'll get a lot of interesting stuff for the mythos filled out. And I really do believe that we're going to get Old Republic stuff. The Old Republic stuff is something that fans will go nuts for, but it has to be handled delicately, and they really have to take their time and focus on it. I mean, you're talking about almost a Game of Thrones-esque era to play in with a ton of lightsabers. And you have different houses and villains and the Sith and the Jedi. I think it could be very, very interesting. And honestly, if they did an Old Republic trilogy instead of going into the next saga, I would be so into it, it's not even funny. But it's more likely that they would do that on television or something to that effect. There's also, of course, the Star Wars land that is happening. That's going to be a big haven and a place for people to go and enjoy Star Wars at. So I think that that is going to be very interesting. But as far as the future of the films, I do tend to believe we are going to take a break from the Saga films, but that is only because they need to really figure out what they're going to do long term for the story, and they need to set up some kind of a cyclical nature with that line, or decide that the Saga films can be about something other than the Skywalkers. It's an interesting dilemma because there's a lot of respect they want to give to Lucas and to the way that that story unfolded originally. And honestly, everybody in the story group believes right now, like Kiri Hart has said this, Saga films are about the Skywalkers. Star Wars story films are about the universe and the galaxy at large. So it depends on a lot of different factors how this current Saga trilogy ends, but I do tend to think that we will take a step back from the Saga films, not necessarily the characters that we currently have running around or Star Wars in general. But let me know in the comment section, do you agree that now is the best time ever to be a Star Wars fan? And what do you think we are going to experience with the future of the films beyond the current saga? I'd love to have a dialogue about this in the comment section. I know a lot of you guys love Star Wars the same way that I do, so I'm looking forward to chatting with you about that. And like I said, I hope you're having an awesome May the 4th. And, you know, obviously the return of the 5th following that with a little bit of the dark side. I did a podcast with Rebel Scum, which will be coming out, and I'll put that up on social media, put a link to their channel in this video, so check that out. As I always say, I hope you are having an awesome and nerdy day. See ya!